started. Let's call the City Highland Park Committee of the Whole meeting of the City Council, February 27, 2023, to order.
Councilmember Cotw. Councilmember Stolberg. Councilmember Stone.
Here.
Councilmember Bloomberg.
Here.
Councilmember Holloman.
Here.
Councilmember Lower.
Here.
Mayor Rory.
Here. We have quorum. We have a motion to approve the minutes from the February 13th Committee of the Whole meeting.
So moved.
Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, those minutes are approved. Our scheduled business this evening is continuation of the permanent memorial framework discussion. And so we will continue our discussion this evening regarding the permanent memorial to ensure that the lives and legacies of those we lost in the Highland Park shooting are remembered and respected. As mentioned last month, there will be many conversations about the memorial, and decisions will absolutely include feedback from victims' families, survivors, and the public. These conversations are sensitive in nature and often bring a range of emotions to the forefront. So it's imperative that as we proceed with discussions and planning, that we make an extra effort to respect and care for one another and recognize that some folks involved in this conversation may need more time, may need more space. Over the last 8 months, nearly 8 months, we've become acutely aware that there is no clear roadmap to tell us what to do and how to do it. However, we will continue to be deliberative and make decisions with open hearts and open minds as we take the necessary next steps to move forward together. And I think it's important to note, and thanks for having something prepared for us, that this meeting is to just sort of talk about how we best want to proceed, what type of organizational structure we want to have in place to help move forward with these conversations, and recognizing that there are many, sadly, who have gone before us, who have taken years, in some instances decades, to put together their memorials. But the most important thing at this point is just to ensure that whatever process we choose, whatever format we choose, is transparent, fully and completely accessible to the public. Any member of the community who wishes to participate is welcome and will be included. But as far as what this is, certainly we most want to prioritize the voices of those whose families have experienced the worst loss possible, and those who were directly impacted by this tragedy physically, and then also recognizing the need for our community to have a place of reflection and remembrance and respite. So I think, whatever form this takes, it's important that we kind of come to at least the conclusion that we share those priorities in terms of how we'd like to proceed and what the goal is, what the purpose is with all of this. I'm going to turn it over to you to start PowerPoint, and if people have questions, we can start talking and see where we go.
Thank you, Mayor. So as the Mayor noted, and certainly as we all know, the mass shooting that we endured was horrific and emotionally difficult, particularly for those families who lost loved ones. We know that there are a number of individuals that are continuing to struggle with physical challenges as a result of the tragedy. And we are in regular communication with hundreds of victims and survivors as they continue to try to navigate a new way forward. We do have a PowerPoint presentation this evening that just provides some guidance based on feedback that we've received from other communities that have gone before us and pursued permanent memorials. As noted before, we're guided by the Department of Justice. And I do want to recognize and introduce our Resiliency Division team. Cynthia Vargas is our Resiliency Manager, and Michelle Coso is a victim specialist, also as part of our Resiliency team. And so we have put together this PowerPoint, again, just to guide discussion. For public information, this committee of the whole is an opportunity for the council to have a policy discussion about the framework for moving forward. And the objective this evening, as we've discussed as a council, is really to talk about the committee, commission, advisory group, planning structure in terms of our next steps. So first, we want the public to be aware that the temporary memorial that we have at the Rose Garden is going to remain in place. We're going to continue to maintain it until a permanent memorial is established. So again, this location overall has been very well received for those families, for the public, to be able to come. And here are just two images of the garden. And again, this is located adjacent to City Hall, 1707 St. John's. So at the last meeting that we had with the City Council, there was a request that we establish what are some community values that we have in terms of moving forward. So based on that council feedback, and again, feedback from the team, we've identified these 5 values, and certainly we can continue to refine these, add to these as we continue forward. But do want to just make sure we're all on the same page that these are the 5 values that we'll continue to promote as we move forward. Inclusion, transparency, respect and value of all opinions, understanding that this topic is difficult. There are people that are grieving at different rates. There are people that are feeling different things, which may be inconsistent with others around them. And then as we think about a permanent memorial, we really need to think about something that is going to last for decades, generations really beyond us. So in terms of ongoing communication, again, we are being guided by the Department of Justice Office of Victims of Crime. They have been very insightful, provided us good guidance, as they are really kind of the central point of contact for all communities that have gone through mass casualties. So we are in regular communication with them, sharing information with them, and getting their feedback throughout this entire time. We are in regular communication with victims, families, and survivors. This started out as initial contacts when victims met with the FBI at the Family Assistance Center. And this has grown into additional victims and survivors and individuals who are looking for information, who may have been present, not injured, those present and injured, and then certainly families of victims who were killed from the mass shooting. We are in regular communication with our government partners and our community resource partners, and we've identified those groups here. So we meet monthly to talk about programs, services, how we can better serve the public, what type of feedback are all of these respective organizations receiving. Again, so collectively we can best serve the public. The mayor and I meet on a regular basis with our faith leaders, not only in Highland Park, but those that serve the Highland Park area, and that's been a wonderful group in which we share information with them, they amplify it to all their congregants, and then likewise we're getting information back from them. And so we're going to continue with that feedback. All of our commissions, committees, boards, advisory groups, all of our agendas and minutes are posted on the city's website. And so that's the link that you see there on the slide, is where all those agendas and minutes can be found. So as we move forward with whatever type of group is established, we'll continue with that same practice. And then we also want to make sure that the public has email that we set up in July, hpcares@cityhpil.com. So this is an email where individuals can contact us if they have a recommendation, if they have feedback, if they have a good idea that they want us to consider now, or even something into the future. So that email address is checked primarily by our communications manager, Amanda Bennett, as well as other communications and support staff. Okay, so in terms of the planning group structure, what we are recommending moving forward is that whatever type of group is established, that it be advisory to the mayor and city council. As the elected officials of the city, the public has elected you to make those policy decisions. So we're recommending that any considerations be formally presented to the mayor and city council at a future meeting when you have something before you to formally vote on that. We are guided that resiliency efforts for a community generally are about 3 to 5 years. Mayor and I had a meeting with the White House last week and communicated with communities that have endured mass shootings across the nation. And there were communities represented there that are 7, 10 years into their, since their mass shooting, and they're still dealing with resiliency efforts. So that 3 to 5 years, we talked to them about, we really think you should change that, because if we're regularly talking to communities that have gone through these, 7, 10, 12 years, that framework should possibly be looked at. But again, the Department of Justice says 3 to 5 years right now, but understanding that we think perhaps that's a longer time period. And then whatever planning group structure is established, again, we believe it will be compliant with the Open Meetings Act, and then we have current practices, procedures, policies as it pertains to our commissions, boards, groups, committees, and so we will follow those best practices.
Yeah, can I ask one question about the 3 to 5 year time frame?
Yes.
Are we planning on whoever is on this group to be consistent throughout that 3 to 5 years, or do we think there will be turnover among the
I think
people?
that depends on what structure we choose.
Yeah. Okay.
But at the very least, again, my feeling is whoever wants to be involved, be involved. Like, it shouldn't be determined by one thing or another. If you want to participate, if you want to attend the meetings, then absolutely.
Yes. So again, if we do follow that consistent structure, we can certainly use that as a model, where individuals are appointed for a multi-year, 2-year process, and they can be renewed up to 2 additional times, for example. So we can be consistent with that.
Question, I meant to ask one on the last slide, I'm sorry. So when you say that, however we lay this out, 3 to 5 year time frame, so we're talking about then not just the permanent memorial, but ongoing city efforts beyond that memorial?
I think just memorial.
So are we saying it could take 3 to 5 years to plan and implement and install this?
Absolutely.
Okay, I wanted to make sure
Yeah.
that this, whatever structure is, are we talking about then resiliency and further efforts and outreach, or is it just for the purpose of identifying placement type input on the memorial?
So we are talking about the permanent memorial.
Oh.
The resiliency team, obviously, is still in place here at City Hall, and that's one of the questions at the moment is, how long do we have that team in place?
That's, I was just trying to figure out if that was
So-
commingled into this.
Yeah,
Okay.
so, whatever time frame this group decides is the time frame. I think Sandy Hook just dedicated theirs this past December, and that was 10 years.
And I don't think we have a hard stop on a time frame. It's going to evolve.
Right,
Okay,
because
okay.
given what those most acutely impacted are still working through, they need the time, they need the space. This isn't anybody's timetable, but in my mind at least theirs, because it's for them.
The intensity that we're working right now in terms of victim services, victim support, generally the Department of Justice says you're going to be doing that from about a 3 to 5 year basis. But again, what we're learning from other communities is that continues well beyond that. Some communities have thought about, well, should we not even think about the permanent memorial until several years down the road? And again, as we've talked about before, there is no right way to do this. So generally, most communities have started around the time period that we're starting, but again, that's a multi-year process, and it could take 5 years, 10 years, anywhere in between in terms of actually getting to a memorial that is complete.
Orlando, Florida Pulse is still working through some of their stuff, right? Have they, I don't remember if they've even finished their memorial. I know their museum is still in process. I think they're still working on their.
They're still working on it.
And it's been 9 years, I believe, of that. Tony, you had your hand up, and then I see you, Annette.
So, we've been using this term resiliency, and we have staff dedicated to address the issue of resiliency. And there is resiliency as it pertains to victims and individual members of the community. And there's the resilience of our community as a whole. And those are both issues that we don't really understand the length that that issue is going to continue to weigh on either individuals or our community. But within that sort of broad structure and understanding we're not really here to address that. We're here to address this process and how that is going to impact resiliency. And what we really need, I think, is recovery. The recovery of individuals who are emotionally or physically impacted, as well as the recovery of the community.
Well, generally, what we're guided to say is not recovering, but some people will never recover. So
Okay.
that's why they say resilience,
Okay.
right?
And in addition to that point, Tony, and the reason I'm really glad you asked this question, is I like the way this is structured in terms of defining it as memorial. We have a department that deals with resiliency, and all those issues, whether they be recovery or whatever, that is separate, and we don't know how long that department, but for purposes of tonight's discussion, it was my understanding that this commission, agency, whatever we end up doing, is about the memorial.
Right.
And so that gives us a really defined purpose.
Mhm.
And along those lines, and it's not, my cup is always half full. And I truly respect and understand that everybody is going to work this through in their own way, in their own time frame. But only because you said Sandy Hook, I think it's really important to note that one of the fortunate things we haven't had to face is the myriad of lawsuits that they had and the deniers that made it so horrible that, and that's why it's really good that we're focusing on a memorial, because they as a town had to deal with all of this, and their lawsuits didn't get settled till last year. So it was very hard to get to a memorial point when you have lawsuits about people who are calling these families and say this never happened.
Wow.
So this was a really, you know,
We're cautioned.
yes,
Cautioned.
and we have to worry because who knows what comes out of the woodwork.
Right.
But that's why it could take 3 years. And I think one of the reasons the Department of Justice does have that as a guideline is that if you look nationally and internationally, it is more of a 3 to 5 year timeline. So I don't think we're being overly optimistic, and we may be able to do that.
Right.
That's my opinion.
So I appreciate that, and that, I think, was where I'm trying to get to. What we're focused on is deciding on the structure as to how we are going to develop a permanent memorial. And within that, the people that are most impacted by that and should have the most impact on the process and on the final product are those people whose resiliency is still being addressed. And as a community, our resiliency is being addressed. So in terms of when we start and when we finish, I guess the answer to that is when that issue has become sufficiently resolved that those people are comfortable participating in this process. Is that essentially what we're looking at? And that's the relationship between what we're looking at now and the issue of resiliency.
So the scope of this group, and that's a good point, and we'll write a scope that the council is in support of, but the scope would be providing a recommendation to the city council and a permanent memorial that's gonna last for decades. So where that will be, what it will look like, how it'll be structured, that is the scope of what this group would be doing. And
Right, but we're not doing that tonight.
we're not doing that tonight.
No, no,
Tonight,
no.
we're just
I
identifying.
Literally, it's the-
So this is, yeah, so this is really the this is the part where we're looking for your policy feedback this evening. So there's, again, different ways to go about doing it, but we're looking for your feedback in terms of what type of planning structure should we use of a group that's gonna guide us to get to a permanent memorial. So one idea,
Ivan has a question.
No, keep going, go ahead.
okay,
I mean, I'll find the appropriate.
okay.
Okay.
Finish your thought.
So again, here's just 3 suggestions, and again, these, you know, we could come up with others as well. So one suggestion is that this steering committee be made up of the entire city council and the entire Park District Board of Commissioners. Elected officials, you're elected by the people to represent this community. Why do we have the Park District? We have the Park District because we are partners in planning the 4th of July with them. And they're one of the largest government structures. So it's 2 sister governments working together.
And we may need their land.
And we may need their land, right, I didn't wanna jump to that, but okay.
I'll put that up.
Given the fact that it's a multi-year task, you know, the elected officials that are in place, if elected officials come and go, it would be that group of elected officials that would continue guiding this effort until we get to a permanent memorial. One advantage of this opportunity is that instead of having one council liaison or two council liaisons at these meetings, all the elected officials have the opportunity to hear from the public at every single opportunity, every single meeting that we have. All the meetings would be posted in compliance with the Open Meetings Act. Now, if elected officials are not able to go, depending on the meeting structure, we could technically meet without a quorum, but this group cannot vote on anything without a quorum, but dialogue can take place.
But they would be then referring to the council for final.
And again, yeah, we're recommending that all of these groups be advisory to the city council. So ultimately, it would be a final decision by the city council.
So the quorum is just for the purpose of notice, we wouldn't be voting on anything at this meeting anyways.
Exactly.
Correct, it's just for
No,
discussion.
Right.
Correct.
And you're
For discussion.
Like any other commission.
Right, but when we say that the meetings could progress without a quorum, the meetings will still be subject to notice of minutes.
100%, yes, all meetings, right, exactly. So everything that I said before, those things that all stood true, advisory to the city council, agendas posted, minutes posted, everything complies with Open Meetings Act, absolutely.
Michelle?
I'm just curious how the council feels about being a part of a governing commission that recommends to itself. That seems awkward to me, like it's not a true recommending body. And it seems either redundant or not necessary to have it. Like, if I were on the park district, I would wonder why I was participating in this task and devoting significant time and energy to it. If at the end of the day, whatever recommendation we made was just going to be possibly overturned by a small subset of the same group. It doesn't really make sense to me.
And I'm not sure that that's the case, because if we do end up using park district land, there's certainly going to be part of whatever that decision is as well.
But the structure that Guido spoke of is that it would be a recommendation to the council for final, regardless of what negotiations take place.
And I guess my feeling is, not everybody's gonna be able to make every meeting, but everybody makes a council meeting. So you'd have, you know, enough of a presence to be able to take in and hear the information, but given what we're trying to do in terms of inclusivity and transparency and time of day and date of the week and all of that, I'm not sure everybody could make it, but we'd at least be able to have more than two of us at whatever meeting.
Oh,
I'd like to address this. I haven't decided which of the various structures that we're going to be talking about tonight I would ultimately favor, but in response to the question, I would be comfortable with a steering committee comprised of the city council and the park district. First of all, it isn't solely the city council that would be recommending to the city council as a voting group. Secondly, this meeting is exactly the same thing. Our committee as a whole, we engage in making recommendations to ourselves. If there are enough of us wanting to put something on the city council agenda and vote on it, we do. We hash things out here. And I'm perfectly comfortable with that element of that particular option. There are other things I'd like to hear about that option and other options, but for me, that seems sort of customary.
the rationale, really of having this group as a and it's a very good question, but kind of the rationale that when we were thinking about it is because it is the city of Highland Park that is in communication with the victims. I mean, I don't know how many emails the park district is getting in terms of like resiliency efforts and services and things like that, but that is really falling on the city in terms of our communication with our resource partners and the clergy and working through all these issues with the Department of Justice. So it's really for that reason, rather than having kind of two governments now real heavily focused on that, we want the guidance and the input of the park district certainly, but that's why we felt coming back to this corporate authority for the final decision. But we're completely flexible, certainly.
Annette?
You know, Nancy, you said something that, that really started something in my ticking, and that is that when you say inclusivity, And I really think that this process will be inclusive because we're gonna ask people to come and join it. But if we, the entire city council and the entire board of commissioners, are taking up the place of being sort of the advisors to then make the ultimate decision, I feel like we are excluding other voices that won't be as weighty. And my problem with having both full bodies is that in order for it to be a manageable committee, I'd want to hear from my fellow council members and the commissioners, but I think we would be taking up too much literally of the air in the room. And in a way, one of the reasons I like the idea of a liaison, even a rotating type of thing, of 2 liaisons from the park district and the city council, is because I don't think we should take up that much room.
Maybe, if you don't mind, can I just go through them, just because for public purposes, they haven't even heard these options yet.
Sure.
So maybe I could just go through them, just for the public that's watching, and then I think they'll better understand the different options that you're mentioning.
And I'll call on Andres and Michelle next.
Okay. So again, as part of kind of the steering committee structure, all these meetings are gonna be public meetings. They would be subject to the Open Meetings Act. And we would also have significant public engagement through a variety of means. So for example, focus groups. We have focus groups, we wanna just talk to victims. We have focus groups for that purpose. We have a focus group, maybe we just wanna talk to businesses. And so do targeted public engagement throughout that whole process. And again, that process would be defined whenever we have a specific structure. The second consideration is an open call for applications. So this is very much mirror to how we currently structure our commissions, committees, groups, advisory groups. Anyone can apply to volunteer to represent the city on a commission, committee, group, advisory board, task force. We would recommend that we have no larger than 15 people. They would be formally appointed by the mayor with consent of the council. And then we listed preference there, but really, again, what we want to make sure is that we really have a diverse group. The voice of the victims is critical to this conversation, so family of the deceased, individuals present and injured, and in priority thereafter to Highland Park residents and Highland Park businesses. And again, every meeting compliant with the Open Meetings Act and our current practice and procedures for commissions and groups. So that's an open call to the community for an application.
What would happen if more than 2 council members wanted to attend? We'd have to post
So
it.
as part of this, we could have exactly 1 or 2 people that would be formally appointed as liaisons. If someone wants to attend, they can come and observe. They can't engage in the public discussion. Correct, Council?
Yeah, yes, if you had 3 members of the council present and 2 of them participated, that would be a problem unless it was also noticed as a council meeting.
Got it, okay.
Another option is, again, just to ensure diversity of the group, is we identify, for example, that we want 15 people and we want X number of people that are immediate family, we want X number of people present and injured, we want 2 business people. So we identify a framework to really ensure the type of group that we want.
What if you don't get it? I mean, just speak, there may be,
We're all raising our hands.
what's that?
We're all raising our hands.
I'm sorry.
Right,
Sorry, I don't like neither, but.
I'm with you.
it's just an option, it's an option. There was one group, for example.
Michelle, Adam.
Right,
I forgot, sorry.
yeah, there was one group that ended up, had every good intention to do this, and then had a committee of like 30 people, because they wanted to just make sure to have every one of those groups represented. But we would target people in that sense. If no one applied, we would specifically target and say, we have no one representing the business community. We are looking for a business leader to step up. Could you please volunteer your time? And then again, the appointment process would be consistent. So those are the options.
Those are the options.
Yes.
And Andres, if you could talk about the third-party piece that you had recommended to me.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it, because I think regardless of what we choose,
Yeah,
that would be a great component.
so I'm gonna respond to these options first.
Okay,
Yeah, so, and not everybody might know, but I do this for a living, working with organizations, corporate and nonprofit. I'm dealing with, how do you deal with the grassroots voice, and how do you deal with the decision-making from the always, and so yes, you have diversity councils, either because of crises, some big thing happened, and the C-suite is kind of in the hot seat, if you will. We're not, right, but I'm just kidding. That they're dealing with a very touchy issue, and then they have to create a council to address the issues that are surfaced. And there's always concern about checks and balance, right? Like if you just give it to the grassroots, will they understand the bigger issues or all the technical things? And there's always a concern that this might get a little bit difficult to manage because there's so many voices. The flip side is always a concern too. If you have the leaders with position of power driving the process, then it becomes not a very inclusive thing. And the leaders are in a conflict of interest situation because they are positional power and inclusion often clash. Because you have to deal with the reality of power in a room when you're inviting voices that are often not heard or afraid to speak or reluctant to speak when there's people with power in the room. So the design is about managing that. So you want to separate the decision makers from the input, and the front end of the process is to take it in, have some people who are obviously responsible, citizens, residents, families of the victims, etc., be in the front end of absorbing and collecting what the grassroots wants to say. And then the people in position of power, the C-suite, or in our case, city council, are in a position to then take the recommendations to then do what we do, make the difficult decisions that the difficult decision needs to be made. So when I look at that first option, as much as we want to have a spirit of inclusion, that is the least inclusive option in my mind because, it's us and Park District with position of power being on the front end of the process, managing the process, and on the back end of the process. Even as we invite community input, we can't deny the fact that we have position of power that is going to influence the entirety of it. So you really want to find a situation where you split that and not have a position of power on the front end and even on the process so you can be inclusive, hear the voices, without a concern that our power and our presence can influence what is said, not said, and all that. The other two are more inclusive because now we're inviting people who are not us to be part of that. And there can be a good debate about do we have an open option or one by appointed. And I've seen both structures work. My point of view is given how well we have a current governing system with advisories and commissions. People nominate themselves, we have criteria, they have to meet the criteria, we discern it, the mayor weighs in a very meaningful way, we weigh in, and in the end, we go through a very responsible process of a selection process that then entrusts this group of people to then manage the process in a way, and without us worrying about who got excluded or not excluded into application process, and people know that in the end you can't choose everybody, and we have criteria for doing it. I've seen it work very well in the city, I've seen it very well in corporations, and not everybody gets selected, as long as we're clear about the criteria and the process. And that's why I worry about the appointee one, because one of the issues around inclusion is that we have our circle of friends, we have our circle of people we know, and there's always people who are overlooked, always people that are not on our radar. And if we start appointing, we don't know who we're overlooking. If we have an open process that allows people to self-nominate, say why they meet the criteria, then we will be surprised about some really good, interesting people with insight and other sort of skills raising their hands. How do you know that person exists? I tell you, that happens all the time. The surprise of the hidden talent, the overlooked user. And so I feel that the most inclusive, this is one of our principles, is the middle one that allows people to self-nominate. And I feel very confident about our system of government that has worked very well with commissions and advisory groups. And I say, let's use the exact same system to then deal with a touchier, more difficult situation. And because it's more touchy, we can make some tweaks. And one of the tweaks would be that group does not vote on one recommendation, right? That we do with commissions. Commission advisories do vote on one thing, and it could be a 10-5 vote, or a close one. That can be dicey for what we're trying to do. But if we ask them to say, take in the input from the public, have a process, and then they're gonna discern what the trends are. You know, it seems like there's 3 or 4 philosophies or 3 things that keep surfacing. Here they are, we did our work, pros and cons, and then they give it to us. And then we can do our job of discerning, sorting, without putting the pressure of a decision on them, but they're doing the work of listening to the grassroots, processing it without our undue influence of power, and then giving it to us for us to make that decision. Now, to your point, Mayor, conversation, there are great listening methodologies. I mean, the classic town hall, great, focus groups, great, but now there's ways to listening to thousands of people, hundreds or thousands of people using artificial intelligence as a technology. So people can get online from their homes, you have to verify the user, so they have to register, so there's no manipulation. And you ask a question, and people type their answers, and the artificial intelligence does a quantifiable results of the qualitative points of view and ideas that people are doing. And why that is so inclusive, even more inclusive than focus groups at town hall, because in the town hall, it's the extroverts, you know, that will mostly speak. It's the people that have, I don't know, call it an agenda or a strong point of view, whatever, that will speak. And there's a whole bunch of people that are introverts or shy or, you know, not feeling very powerful, that are very reluctant, and we will never hear from them, even if they're in the room. This technology allows people to sort of, it's anonymous in that the name doesn't get put there, but we verify the users ahead of time, and they will then have the freedom to type what they feel, and the artificial intelligence is able to sweep through and very quickly give you a quantifiable result of what the trends are and what people are saying.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks. Okay.
See, I just want to be clear, what you're saying is whichever structure we choose, you'd like to see this type of technique implemented.
Right.
You want to make sure it's
So
clear.
I made my argument.
An overlay for all of them to ensure that all voices are heard.
Right.
Absolutely, which is critical.
Oh, and actually, one more thing then.
Mhm.
I talk about the artificial intelligence. I really recommend that for any one of these, for the listening, we really look at getting a third party.
Right.
That's not us, that is expert in listening massively, at a mass scale, is the expert in these kinds of issues, expert in collecting the data, and they can then sort of summarize it. And if it's that second option that I was talking about, then they are the consultant to that group to help them sort of organize the information in a very professional way and really take into account the various listening forms they're going to do. This artificial intelligence will be one form of listening, but you still want to have some focus groups, you still have some other methods, but this sort of gives you a way to scale the listening.
Right, that's what I thought you were gonna talk about first, so thank you for bringing that in as a setup line, appreciate it. Okay, Michelle?
Thank you, Mayor. So, in thinking about this, and I've thought about this quite a lot, as I know all of us have, one of the things that I think we've heard over and over again is that there's no one right way to do this. We don't know how we should do this, we don't know how long it will take. And the primary guidance that we've had is that it depends on your community, how this should work. And when I started to think about that, about how we move forward within our community, it seemed to me that we have a structure in place within our community. Our commission form of government has been in place for more than 100 years. It is the foundation of our government, of our transparency, of involvement by our community members. It means that every single decision that has been made as our community, whether it be zoning or housing or any major development, has gone through a commission process which ensures that before we even see it, it has been vetted and discussed and reviewed by other citizens, our neighbors, our community, people who have a vested interest. There's public hearings, there's a process that is well documented and has worked for us for the past 100 years. So when I think about what process makes sense for our community, to me, it makes sense to go with the process that we have been using, to invent a new structure made up of another group of public officials seems to me to be leaving out a major component of the process, which is the grassroots feedback. I realize that might be messier than having, all the electeds who know how things work, but I also think that the process that we go through with this memorial in some ways is more important than the memorial that we end up with. The community effort that will go into understanding, healing, and moving forward is valuable as a final structure. And when I thought about what a successful group would look like to develop a memorial, I came up with like a laundry list of skills: landscape architect, visual artist, urban planner, obviously victims or victims' family members, someone with professional development experience if we have to do fundraising, professional communicator, a Spanish speaker, a social worker, psychologist. I had all of these areas of expertise that I think would be important to include on a committee like that. And when I looked around our table and thought about our skill sets, well, we have many skills. We lack that professional diversity that I think would make for a good commission. Other than Andre speaking Spanish, I'm a professional communicator, we don't have a professional fundraiser, urban planner, landscape artist, visual artist. We are very monogamous in our skill set as councilmen, and our only shared skill is that we were elected, and I don't think that's enough. So I respectfully suggest that we go with either an open call for applications with specific categories, where we can, distill what we need. I think that part of it we can come to, but I think establishing that commission, using the structure that we've had in place, allows staff to have clear guidelines. It allows us to be very clear on what we would expect from our commissioners. It removes the political figures from the process and encourages grassroots communication. It offers an opportunity for diverse expertise, where we might bring in people who have backgrounds other than our skill sets. And it allows for a structure to take place that will be able to dedicate the time to this endeavor. In my opinion, this is going to take a long time. I think 3 to 5 years was incredibly optimistic, but I don't care if it takes longer than that. The time period is not important to me, but I don't know that it's reasonable to take elected officials who already meet at least twice a month, plus a commission or two, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 times a month, and to add in the rigor of a commission schedule on top of that and have meaningful participation. So I think if you have dedicated commissioners who take this position seriously, who are appointed for 2 years and then get reappointed or have open positions, I think that's a tried and true position, tried and true structure, and that I hope will pursue.
Thanks, thank you. And I appreciate all the thought that you put into this. I'd love to know what the interface with the resiliency team would be, because we have mental health professionals, people who are professionals and working with survivors and victims, people who speak Spanish within that group. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what the resiliency team's interface would be with this organization, whatever form it takes.
So we are suggesting that the city manager and the resiliency manager be the staff leads for this. And then we would include other professional staff as needed. So there are times we're gonna need feedback from police, certainly we've got planners on staff, victim liaison. So we will plug in all of our professional staff as needed, but I don't think all our staff need to be at every single meeting, certainly.
And I would presume that regardless of what structure this took, there would be an RFQ process at the end of this, or an RFP in terms of finding the right people with the right, just in looking through what other cities have done, I think Sandy Hook started off with 200 submissions and then whittled it down to 10. And that wasn't their group, that was them putting out a request for proposals and then receiving those back in and having that opportunity for that public conversation about, do we have the space, do we have the resources, and so forth, so.
Yeah, that's what we
That's what that
anticipate, and that's part of what we would work on with the group. We would pull sample RFQs, RFPs that other communities have done. We would share those so people have a chance to see them and work with whatever group you establish, we would work with as part of that process.
Thanks. And I do appreciate, Tony, what you said about the committee of the whole being a referring body to the council, because while we started as a commission-based organization, at some point we changed to council manager form of government, right? So that seems to be working for the vast majority of what we've been doing. Just wanted to kind of clarify that point of history. Adam had his hand up, and
Chance,
then,
I'm good.
you're good, okay, Kim?
No, the benefit was interrupting Michelle, so I'm cool.
That's all you want to do, was interrupt Michelle? Okay, 2 points over there. Kim?
Yes, thank you. So, I'm still undecided as to which of these I think is the best approach. I asked at our previous meeting what other communities have done in terms of structure, and I still don't think we have enough information.
Because it's all over the place. It is literally all over the place. Some, just like a group of volunteers said, we're it.
Yeah.
Others, it's been appointments. My hugest concern is just if we have this group of 15, who's not on this group? That's my biggest concern.
That was my next point, was is 15 enough? I mean, Michelle's listing all of these different skill sets that would be useful to have on this group. And it sounds like 15 may not be enough. We've got 7 people who were killed. We've got
48 who were shot.
Yeah, so that's a lot of people right there, and I would hate to have to turn down anyone who wants to participate. So I understand what Anders is saying about the need for a grassroots kind of structure where people feel comfortable speaking and contributing, but we need to figure out a way to do so where we don't exclude anybody who wants to participate. And I'm not sure if the commission structure is the way to do that or something else. And that also, I would want to make sure that the park district has a good amount of involvement in this because of their partnership on the parade and because of the impact that they had, which is pretty significant. So while the council may be making the final decision, the park district needs to be involved at a high level, and I'm not sure how we make that work appropriately. So I think these are all good possibilities, but I think they need a little bit of tweaking to.
We certainly, again, we're meeting monthly with our governments and our resource partners. So we're going to keep all those groups that previously saw on that slide apprised throughout the planning process, and we'll plug them in certainly as needed. Communities that have, set up commissions, if you think of like subgroups. So for example, you can have a subcommittee of individuals where if you're looking at an RFP for artwork, maybe you want to have more people involved that have an art background, and so you set up a subcommittee to make sure that you have those specialists. But most of all, I would say, in terms of, if you get 100 applications, I don't think you want to appoint 100 people as part of a group. But what we're going to do is encourage everybody to be at these public meetings, to follow along. We're going to keep them involved, and every single voice is going to be important throughout that process.
Tony? And then, sorry, Andres, and then Tony, and then Michelle.
Yeah, actually, I just want to confirm in the models that we use that subgroup approach really works because many times you do have more people you can manage and really don't want more than 12 to 15 people to be the core group, but then you need the technocrats, right, the specialists in X, Y, and Z. And people like the focus, like they don't want to be part of what they're tapping for urban planning or tapping for art, and I'm happy to be with other people like me and we'll address that more narrow.
Right.
And then one other loose end, just looking at us, overseeing the process, why it's also problematic is that we too are victims of what happened in different ways. So again, if we were on that first one, now we're the front, the middle, and the end, but we ourselves are emotionally involved in it as well. So by being able to separate, the process in this way from the grassroots and then our part, and then we'll manage what we have to in terms of our own emotions, but to manage it through this whole process as we're trying to make decisions and decide over it, that's very problematic.
Thank you. Tony?
So, first of all, a lot of great ideas. I'm particularly interested in the thought of an independent outside third party participating at some level in the process. And I think that provides some help to us in a very direct way as well as help to the group that we decide is going to be the structure. I think it's very important to keep the three issues here separate and distinct. Input versus recommendation versus decision. Ultimately, the city council will make a final decision. The importance of being inclusive addresses itself both in terms of input and recommendation. the recommendation is gonna come from whatever group ultimately is formed to make the recommendation to the city council. That is not gonna be an unlimited sized group. Obviously, we want that group to include people who are relevant, especially victims and people with an idea of what the memorial may mean to them and to the community. But the input part is even more important, and that's where, as talked about, every one of these meetings is gonna be open. And you bring up an interesting point, are we gonna have applications or appointees? We may need to have both, whatever the structure is. Some people may be reluctant to fill out an application, but known to one or another of us as somebody who may be a valuable asset to be part of the recommending process. Some people may not want to make a recommendation, but want to be heard about their thoughts about what ought to be considered. And that's why the meetings are going to be open. So the structure is important, and some leadership within the structure, I think, is also critical. And when we talk about grassroots, we all want a grassroots involvement in terms of input and a recommendation, but it can't be completely unstructured. We have seen from time to time, even within commissions, that are functioning within ordinances as to what they're supposed to be focused on, but things can get off the rails. We've had task forces to address individual issues that have no council input and often wind up unfocused. And my concern is that because of the emotional impact that this has on our community, you already know there are some people that want to, quote, move on. Other people that want to address this and have a very personal involvement in the event, in the way they're affected and what they want the memorial to mean, where they want it. There needs to be an accommodation of all of that to be heard, but there also has to be some form of leadership, whatever structure we have. Again, I don't have yet a preference within these three alternatives, but whichever we pick, it's going to have some level of leadership, and I realize that can make people at times feel like they can't say whatever they want to say. But if we just have a free-for-all, it's not going to be productive, and it's going to be damaging to us as a community. And I think that's important, whatever format we eventually choose.
Thanks, thank you. And I was thinking of, we've done a few other just major sort of grassroots projects, for lack of a better analogy, but when we did our year-long citywide anti-bullying work, we were very well served by third parties, as I mentioned to you when we talked this weekend. Like, we had people who specialized, who came in, who were the right people to bring out all voices and all different formats, in different languages. It worked very, very well. So again, I appreciate you raising that as a critical part of whatever structure. And so too, believe it or not, the sesquicentennial, that ended up with multiple committees. That was organized chaos, but at the end of the day, there was a lot that came out of it because of the grassroots and who wanted to do what, managed very well by Gita at the end of the day. So I think regardless of the structure that we land on, those voices will absolutely be the priority, but most particularly those who are being memorialized need to be the priority. I have Michelle, and then Kim, and then Adam, and then Annette.
All right, I just want to address a couple of issues. One, ultimately, I think it's important to remember, you will be the decision makers. This council, in the end, it made it very clear that whatever happens, you get to decide. So I don't think you're giving up much by going with a commission structure to make a recommendation to you to make a decision. And that's the process that we use in our city to come up with tough decisions. So I think the idea that this commission might be charged with offering up 3 ideas is a great one, right? Why, they don't have to give a single idea. They can put out an RFP, rank the ones that they like the best, and say, okay, council, here's your decision. Meet with the park district, go through your process. But that would be a process that we followed like all other processes when it comes to big decisions, and I think that's valuable. And I think those commissions are ultimately led by staff, so you don't have to worry about it being chaos. Staff is quite capable, and I think our resiliency people will be very astute managers because they have skills and understand the group dynamics that we would be dealing with. And finally, part of what you want to do in a situation like this is the message that you send with this decision that you make. So if you say we want to have an open, inclusive process for the community, but we're going to be in charge of it, and we're going to be totally, and we're going to include another elected body, but we're not going to offer any community members an opportunity to take a leadership role, I think that sends the wrong message. So I think you have an opportunity to have an inclusive process starting from the bottom up, and I think that it would be well served to use a commission in this process.
I'm just so gravely concerned with people feeling excluded,
But how would they be included with the council being in charge?
because we would have a third party bringing in focus group
Same thing with the
professionals.
commission, absolutely. They would also
But you're
have that.
allowing people, but you're saying we're gonna have it be 15, and if 20 apply, 5 aren't included. We have this problem now, and that's actually how we ended up with advisory groups, was to expand the number beyond what was committed by statute, to give more flexibility and remove term limits. That was literally where the advisory group format came from, was our concern that people were being excluded.
Do you think people would feel less excluded if they couldn't participate at all in the process of leadership?
I'm not sure why you would think nobody would be able to participate.
You know what I'm saying, like, if you couldn't be a leader on a commission or you couldn't be a leader in the decision-making process, if you had no opportunity for that, would you feel like you had more of a voice than if you?
I don't know why they wouldn't be. If we're
Well, that's what I'm
literally
saying, look,
prioritizing having all voices heard.
right, but that's happening in any structure, in any of those structures, there's room for an outside facilitator, for focus groups, for Andres's, AI, like, all of these, it's just a matter of who's leading the group. And I'm suggesting that the leadership of the group, if you have the opportunity to apply to be a leader, and you don't get it, you can at least understand that there was a process you went through. If you don't have the opportunity to apply to be a leader, because the leaders have already decided that they're leading it, you don't have any voice in the leadership.
Adam, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. First of all, it's clear that everybody is so concerned about this issue. And first of all, second of all, your comments were an area that, you and I had discussed, that AI, but I really wasn't aware of some of the other points that you brought up, and I think they're excellent. I have a couple issues, and I'm not on one or the other, I'm kind of like in between, some type of hybrid between one and two. Because I do have concerns about limiting the number of people. If we're going to talk about inclusivity, then let's be inclusive. But I also believe, as you talk about subgroups, and you mentioned particular skill sets that could be part of, the memorial's not going to be one over and done. There are going to be several pieces, many pieces, that have to work together to achieve a beautiful, appropriate, respectful, and every other word that goes with it. So I think there's room, and not turning away or not being inclusive to as many people as want to participate. But if you're going to go that route, and I think we should, that's where I kind of start going back to the hybrid between one and two. I've seen commission meetings that get out of hand. I've seen commission meetings where we can't have a quorum, and now what? And there's just so many different things that could happen. But if you were to open this to, as many people as want to have their voice heard, the question becomes, how many of those people want to have their voice heard, or how many of them actually want to be involved in making the recommendation? And I think that could be two different groups of people as well. So I think if you could open this up to as many people, if you could define, we talked about it at the BDAG meeting a couple weeks ago. Here's what we want to do, but there's some people who are willing to go out on the street and talk to businesses. There are other people who can create a questionnaire or survey. I don't know how you limit it to only 15 people. I really think you're gonna get a much more significant response for people who wanna be involved. But at the same time, you need, even if it's delegating to those subgroups, a mission, a scope, a report back timeframe, I think you need someone driving this that may not be a commission member from scratch. If you look at our commissions, most of the time, we have a farm system. We don't put a chairman of a commission on right from the get-go. They serve on the commission, they learn how it works, they understand the process, and then they move up through the ranks. So I think that open calls for nominations is great. I think you're gonna have a tough time limiting it to 15 people. I think there are many pieces to this commission that some people may want to be a part of, and not necessarily the whole process. And I think we have to address how we can do that. And then going back to kind of, number one, who's gonna drive the bus? Who's gonna kind of keep everything moving in the right direction? And I don't have that answer, man. I don't. I think there's been a lot of really good points, and I think the key here is I think we all want to be as inclusive and respectful as possible. And then the other thing is what happens these committees meet. It's an open, notice. What about people who have something very valuable to input and are just for personality or emotional trauma from being physically injured or losing a loved one and are not comfortable participating in an open forum? So how do we make sure their voice is part of what gets sent to whatever this recommending body is? And maybe as you bring up a subgroup, maybe there's a lot more than 15, and then there's another recommending body that pulls everything together and is comprised of, a different subset. I don't know. I'd like to have as many people involved as possible, but I think you need someone to keep it on track.
The other piece also is recognizing that there's variability in terms of those impacted. You can't say, we will meet on this Tuesday of this month at this time, because some may be working third shift. Some may have responsibilities at home. Some may not be physically able to come to a meeting. And I think that's important for whatever structure we come up with. It's almost, for lack of a better analogy, when we worked on the sesquicentennial, we had a lot of people. Over 50, we had a lot of people. And they broke themselves out into subgroups, basically. Some wanted to only be focused on creating a quilt. Some only wanted to work on a book. Some only wanted to work on the party. And it was, at the very beginning, completely chaotic. But it settled itself pretty quickly in terms of who wanted to be involved with lots of things and who wanted to just be involved with one sub-piece. And I think that may be worth having is that first meeting or that first series of meetings, like neighborhood meetings, meeting at different times of day, meeting at different locations for people's varying abilities, meeting with people who can translate, and sort of seeing what the community's response is, what the level of interest is. There may only be 5 people who are interested. There may be 100 people who are interested. We don't know. And so that's why I'm kind of curious about, coming up with some way to get started. And nothing's cast in concrete. And if it ends up that way is diminishing what our goals are. We stated at the outset, and I appreciate that slide so much, what are our values? Inclusivity, all voices. And we're all grassroots. Nobody wants to be like, this is the decision. That's not how we operate around here. Sorry, I've been monologuing for a while. I think Annette came first, then Tony, then Kim. And then I.
So a couple of things. I think this comes down to a group of different levels. Obviously, inclusivity is not only important, it's what we all want to achieve. You can't govern through inclusivity. What you can do is you can listen to all voices. And so whatever this process is, whoever, let's say it is 15 people, is that guides it, I think it's incumbent upon pulling all of those things in through focus groups, through AI, whatever vehicle we can. And so no one should be turned away who applies for anything. There will be involvement, in my eyes, through whatever form we choose, because we are going to include people. But to Tony's earlier point, it still has to be a workable group. That means that it has to run. It has to be people who understand how to run a meeting. There was nothing more frustrating than being on PDC when someone didn't know Robert's rules and was trying to run a meeting that had a lot of different pieces in it. So number one, I feel very assured that we will have the best of staff, not to take away from all staff, but whether it's through the park district or through us, we will have the best of guidance through staff. And that's one really important piece to it. The second thing I think that we need to look at is in this application process, whatever that may be, to look for whether it's different people, and I'm somewhere between 2 and 3. And the reason it's between 2 and 3 is because there are a lot of groups I would like to see somehow represented. My optimal would be to open the applications and to have 300 people apply, which is what I'm really hoping happens. And that we end up with 3 social workers and 3 psychologists and 3 people from the park district who happen to be a commissioner but who are applying or whatever it is, although I think they should have a liaison. But whatever it is, I would like to see that kind of inclusivity on the steering committee, and I'm going to just call it that for a minute, but on the formal governing commission that is going to take charge of all these different processes, hear all those voices, and bring them forward in a way that comes down to a couple of different options that we as a decision-making body will ultimately decide on. I have to tell you, I'm very relieved to hear that the council is going to keep what we were elected for in its power, which is the final decision-making. I do distinguish between our committee of the whole structure and our city council structure because we never take a vote and we're not advising ourselves. And frankly, if anything, we know because of open meetings how exclusive it is that we can't have conversations back and forth with people. So to me,
But we do.
well, you try and manage that, but when we're having 300 people, what I would like to see is a process where people do have their voices heard, but you have to have a governing structure. And I really believe that if that governing structure consists of us and the park district, it is the most exclusive process out there. And I also believe that I really like the way the city runs. I think we've been very successful in terms of the advisory groups. And we've tweaked them from the commissions when you saw that it wasn't inclusive enough. And I also think frankly, and I really believe this, if we ended up with 200 or 300 applications, I think, you know how I said like 3 social workers and we decided that was one criteria we wanted? I think we should have a lottery. I really do. Once we cull it to the point of view where we know that everybody there is a Highland Park resident, fills one of those buckets, then we open it to a lottery so that people know that it wasn't, you were chosen because you're somebody's best friend. You were chosen because you happen to be the next door neighbor of a commissioner or a council member. I really don't want to have that happen. And so once we get to the main, you know, let's say we get it down to 60 people and we have 4 in every category, we should be so lucky. But we do. And you know, I disagree about an application because if we don't get the people, we may go out and recruit them. But if we recruit them, they still have to put forward an application. Because frankly, if they can't get to that point of involvement, then they can't make the commitment over 2 years of coming to regular meetings and having their heart on their sleeve at every one of these meetings. I mean, what we went through at our August meeting was the most wrenching public meeting I have ever sat through in my life. And in all my years of existence, I have never been more upset. And that was one meeting. And so whomever sits on this as a steering committee, they have to know that at each of these meetings, there's going to be a lot of people who are hurting, whether they're talking through a focus group, or they're typing in, or we're listening to their comments through emails that maybe they submit, however the structure goes. But I have to trust that the residents of this community are extremely well educated, they're extremely thoughtful, and it means a lot to them. And if they have to go through the full process of an application, they had to think through the commitment they want to make. Okay? We weren't elected my estimate, we were elected to govern. I don't think we were elected to do all the research. I think we want to pull in the community to do that research, and then even to monitor that research. And we can be as inclusive as 4,000 people, whether it's because of this AI or focus groups or whatever. But we also have to manage it and come out with a product. And I believe we can get a product out of this community and an open process. So that's where I fall. I will say that when we questioned before whether it'll be open in any of these formats, people will be included. So I just want to,
That has to be,
and that's tantamount to everything.
right.
But I do want to say that for appearances, as a city council member, I would feel very badly if people felt, okay, I elected her to be on the city council, and now she gets to hog the whole process here. I'm just saying, I don't want, I want the perception to be so transparent and open that people know that if 800 people apply, then you know what? We're gonna go through 800 applications, and we're gonna cull it down to a somewhat manageable number of 100, and then we'll do a lottery.
So being fully transparent, our meeting starts at 7 and dinner is in the next room waiting. So I want us to
I'm
kind of, no, I appreciate everything you're saying and all of this has been really vital and important and we may not have a conclusion this evening. Tony, then Kim, then Andres.
I just want to say that as we're trying to figure out what the structure ought to be, particularly coming on these last comments, we should have an open call for applications regardless of what the ultimate structure is. That's going to tell you a lot about what you can and can't do. If you get 5 applications, that may say something about the willingness at that moment to even commence. If you get hundreds of applications, then you've got a different issue. I'm remembering when we've gone through master planning processes, which is as open a process as the city goes through, with charrettes and community meetings, and everybody gets an input, and it's vastly disorganized. But at least everybody has the sense that they've had a chance to see it and say whatever it is they need to say. But ultimately, the decision, as we've agreed, would be by the city council. That fortunately goes through the planning commission. This is going to be a group that has one purpose only, and that's different from our commissions and our advisory groups. It's more like a task force. So I think whatever the final format is going to be governed by the response to a call for participation.
Right, which is why I was sort of thinking, if we just have a first meeting, you kind of get the sense of, is there interest?
How many people are going to come out?
Right.
How many people want to show up to the regular meetings, as opposed to who's going to come and want to have their say, hear what's going on, and participate in that way.
And at the end of the day, it just matters that everybody's voice
Right.
is heard. Okay, thank you. Kim, then Andres, and Michelle.
I like what Adam suggested as a hybrid between 1 and 2. I like what you mentioned in terms of how the second centennial work. I like what Tony is saying about some sort of, call for applications. Maybe we want to do some community meetings and get input from people about how they think the structure should be, and get people involved and see where it goes from there. I know that it's all over the board, but I still would like to know where the communities that have been successful at creating a committee to do a memorial, how they've done it.
Full spectrum. There's no best practice. It's just organic and it comes from within.
So give that some sort of a structure where we have a call for people, where we do some community meetings to get input from the community about how best to do this, and then come back together. That might provide us.
Help us see
direction.
what level of interest and so on.
And where the community wants to be.
So the application currently to volunteer on an advisory group board commission for the city, we do ask for professional educational background, service with other city organizations, special skills / certifications, and I would just, and then we ask if you've ever been convicted of a felony, and then I would ask, I would also add the question, why are you interested in serving? it specific to the planning group or whatever.
One thing that I think absolutely needs to be addressed is there were many people impacted who are not Highland Park residents. And how do we make sure those voices are included in the conversation? And how do we make sure that they're able to participate in the planning?
Absolutely. So what we would do is we can certainly, we intend to follow up with all the victim contacts that we have regardless and just talk about a summary of this meeting and then any next steps. If there is an application process, what we would suggest is any of the victim contacts, and we could define victim as next of kin, individuals who lost loved ones and present and injured. That group does not have to be a Highland Park resident. So include any one of those. If you fit that category, then you would be invited to submit an application and be considered for part of the group. But anyone else, or you may want to say a business owner, doesn't have to be, but your business has to be in town. But it's up to the city council, but certainly for that group, we know that there are victims that are not residents, and we want their voices heard, certainly, so that would carve an exception.
And people who are in the hot zone, who are not residents, but who were right there, you know what I'm saying? So I think the challenge is growing. I kind of want us to wrap this up now, but Michelle, Andres, Adam, can you give it to me in like 2 or 3 sentences? And I think we're gonna have to continue this conversation. I don't think we have any kind of clarity at this point, and I think there's a lot more that people wanna think about. Great points raised this evening, and I'm comforted knowing that we all want to achieve the same goal, and that is to be as inclusive as possible, to have that input come from the grassroots, and to do it in a way that is as transparent as possible and as public as possible. Okay, so Andres, Michelle, Adam, and then we've got to be done by 6:50.
Yeah, well, I believe that given who we are here, the quality of our staff, the quality of our residents, the quality of the process we've had, I think we can trust what exists, and I think we can trust our ability to fine tune the process, to do good checks and balances, to navigate the concerns. I think we shouldn't be afraid of what could happen when I think we have the wherewithal to manage it with eyes wide open. And in terms of the process, in the structure, and I'm talking from best practices, you can select a core leadership team. It's all 15 people, right? Then you can, in the application, you can say, and we're also looking for working groups or experts in these areas, where you may not want to be part of the leadership team, but you want to be a consultant or a voice or an expert. And we can, in the application process, start already sorting out who's interested in being in the leadership team versus who's interested in being an expert in these 5, 6, 7, 12 buckets, whatever the case may be. And that will help us with the distillation process. So you have the core leadership team, and I think leadership is really key, people that have the ability to lead, the expert groups, and then multiple listening forums. That it would be clear, even in the process, I'm not an expert, I don't want to be a leader, but I want to be heard, and I can do it through the focus group, through the town hall, I can do it through this AI thing, and we're very clear about it. So that we will communicate, and you can participate at any entry level.
Right.
Now you have to raise your hand for certain things. You won't be necessarily selected, but we're clear about the criteria. And if we say we have too many, we will have a lottery, so everybody knows the rules of engagement in the front end.
Perfect.
So I think
Thank you.
that's really key as we go through this process. And so that's what I would suggest.
Thank you, appreciate it.
All right, I'm not gonna repeat, second what you said, because I agree with all of it. I wanna give 2 examples. One was the Community Foundations Committee that we distributed funds. We just went through this process. We had a separate committee that went through an extensive process that took input, that had community input, that there was a leadership team. They met with the community, they met with the victims, they gathered information. We went through a very deliberative process, and their report will be published this week. I think it's a great model for exactly how this could work. Not a single one of us, except for me as a liaison, and I only served in a liaison capacity, was a member of that, and it worked beautifully. So I think it is very possible to do exactly what we're talking about and not be the leadership of that team. And second of all, I would just caution that if you're gonna put out an application, before you've defined the role, you're asking for trouble, because if I'm gonna apply to be on a commission, and then all of a sudden you tell me that based on what you found, we're not gonna have a commission, I'm gonna be really upset. So I think just before we go ahead and say, you know, it's one thing to have a town hall and listen to opinions, but if you're accepting applications for something, I expect that I'll at least be considered for it and possibly appointed to something. So I think you've gotta be very careful before you start putting out your call for applications, and that is not the way, in my opinion, to solicit or to understand interest. There's other ways to do that.
Great point. Adam?
Thanks, Mayor. You were able to say what I was trying to say, and when you said whittle it down to 100, have a lottery, you still have to have the worker bees and the leadership. And I think the way that you defined it, and maybe it's through the application process, is, you know, where does your interest lie? You know, what is your skill set? Would you, you know, please keep in mind that of all the applicants, there will be a leadership team of 15 to 20 people or whatever. Would you want to serve on that and define what their role would be in recommending a couple different ideas to the council, and let them know that the ultimate decision will be that of the council. I can't tell you how many times, you know, at a commission level, people get upset, oh, I thought they were gonna make a decision here tonight. We're just a recommending body. So I think this whole process has evolved some really good ideas that will allow us, I think, to be more inclusive and still get the job done and stay on track. The only other thing I wanted to add, Mayor, is you had mentioned about, you know, opening it up to anybody who is in the hot zone and involved in other businesses. But respectfully, I want to caution that we did see after the 4th, other businesses, other people, other entities, organizations that came in with their mindset as to how you talk about disbursement of funds. So we have to be careful that our mission and our community is still front and center. Because we did see a little bit of that with how we were gonna handle the distribution of,
Right.
you know what I'm talking about.
I do
So
indeed.
I
And I
just
think my
wanna-
point is more just gathering the input.
Totally agree.
So, you know, not saying just because you happen to live out of town, we're not gonna have your input from this event that you also were.
we just don't want someone with a, taking such an important, responsible decision and
Right.
bringing in an ulterior motive.
Totally understand.
Hey, Mayor, just one point, just for the record, just one, it's important. When you read the criteria, you said about professional experience, so we're gonna have to equitably look at that, because there's people with leadership skills that don't have professional experience.
Absolutely, absolutely. And their voices are extremely important in this conversation. Thank you. Do you have your hand up? Oh, okay. We don't have anything for closed session, as I recall, so I'm seeking a motion to adjourn. And wait, before we even go there, I just, again, want to say thank you to each and every one of you for all of the time and all of the thought and all of the deep diving that's been going on. This is a challenge, and I'm sorry that there's no easy answer, but I appreciate everybody's time and input tremendously. Okay, now I'm taking a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye.